My name is Bree, and I'm 29 years old. I never thought my mother's 60th birthday would be the night that changed everything between us forever. There she stood, champagne glass raised high designer dress, sparkling under the restaurant lights, looking directly at me as she announced to our entire family and all her friends that her greatest birthday wish was for me to leave her life. Completely. The room went silent. I felt my heart shatter into 1,000 pieces as everyone stared. After years of her criticism, control, and emotional manipulation, something inside me finally snapped. Before I share how I turned my mother's cruel birthday wish against her, let me know where you're watching from. Hit like and subscribe if you've ever had to make the difficult choice to cut toxic family from your life. My mother, Sylvia, was never the warm, nurturing type that other kids seem to have. While my friends' moms baked cookies and hung their artwork on the refrigerator, my mother scrutinized every aspect of my existence with the critical eye she developed during her years as a beauty pageant contestant. Before marrying my father, she had been Miss Maryland and nearly won Miss America. That perfectionism never left her even long after her pageant days were over. "Stand up straight, Bree. No one will take you seriously with that slouch," she would say, physically pushing my shoulders back until it hurt. "That outfit makes you look pudgy. Go change immediately," was a common phrase I heard before school, regardless of how carefully I had chosen my clothes. My childhood wardrobe consisted of only the most expensive brands, but ironically, I never got to choose a single item. Every piece was selected by my mother to create what she called the perfect image for a Harper woman. Our family name carried weight in our affluent community, and Sylvia was determined that I would never tarnish it by looking anything less than immaculate. My father, Richard Harper, was a successful international businessman who spent most of my childhood on planes and in foreign hotel rooms. When he was home, he was kind but distant, retreating to his study to handle calls or review documents. He never stood up to my mother's controlling behavior. I think he found it easier to focus on work than to engage in the constant emotional battles at home. "Your mother wants what's best for you," he would say with a tired smile whenever I complained. "She just shows her love differently than most people." When I was 16, my father died suddenly of a heart attack during a business trip to Tokyo. I remember the funeral being more like a networking event than a memorial service. My mother wore a perfectly tailored black Chanel suit and never shed a tear in public. She spent the entire reception speaking to my father's business associates about the future of Harper Industries while I sat alone in a corner truly grieving, the only parent who had ever shown me any warmth, however limited it had been. After my father's death, Sylvia's control over my life intensified dramatically. Without his occasional buffering presence, she micromanaged everything from my college applications to my social circle. She insisted I major in business despite my passion for art and design. She vetted my friends based on their family backgrounds and social connections. Dating was practically forbidden unless the boy came from one of a handful of families she deemed acceptable. "You're a Harper, Bree. You can't just waste your time with average people," she would say whenever I brought home a new friend she didn't approve of. Throughout my teenage years and early 20s, I desperately tried to win her approval. I graduated at the top of my class from the business school she selected. I lost weight to fit her idea of the perfect figure. I straightened my naturally wavy hair because she thought it looked messy. I changed my voice to be softer, my laugh to be more reserved, and my personality to be whatever she wanted that day. Nothing was ever enough. After college, I had dreams of moving to New York to work in marketing for a fashion company, combining my business degree with my suppressed love of design. Sylvia shut that down immediately. "Your father built this company for you to inherit. You will not abandon your responsibilities to chase some childish fantasy," she declared. "Besides, the family trust stipulates that you need to be actively involved in Harper Industries to receive your inheritance." That was how I ended up working as a vice president at Harper Industries, directly under my mother's supervision. While the title sounded impressive, the reality was that Sylvia maintained iron-fisted control over every decision. My ideas were routinely dismissed, or worse, claimed by her as her own when they proved successful. The financial arrangement was even more complex and controlling. While I technically owned 49% of the company, according to my father's will, Sylvia had been named the controlling trustee until I turned 35. This meant that despite my executive position and ownership stake, I had limited access to the company finances. My mother paid me a salary that was generous enough to maintain appearances, but kept me dependent on her for any major expenses. My personal bank accounts were joint accounts that she had opened when I was a child, giving her complete visibility into my spending. When I once attempted to open my own account, she found out through her connections at the bank and created such a scene about family loyalty that I backed down. By my late 20s, I lived in a beautiful downtown apartment that was technically in my name, but had been purchased with family money that Sylvia never let me forget she controlled. I drove a luxury car that was registered to Harper Industries. I wore expensive clothes that my mother often selected for company events. To outsiders, I appeared to be a privileged, successful young businesswoman. In reality, I was trapped in a gilded cage, financially and emotionally dependent on a woman who seemed incapable of genuine maternal love. Despite the growing resentment, I couldn't see a way out. My entire identity, career, and financial security were tied to my mother and the family business. Walking away would mean starting from nothing at nearly 30 years old. So I stayed swallowing my pride and dreams, hoping that somehow, someday, she would finally be proud of me or at least treat me with basic respect. That day never came. Instead, her 60th birthday arrived, an event that would finally push me past my breaking point. Planning my mother's 60th birthday celebration was like organizing a small wedding. For months, I meticulously arranged every detail to meet her exacting standards. The venue had to be Rossetti's, the most exclusive restaurant in town, where reservations typically required 3 months' notice. I called in personal favors and paid an exorbitant premium to secure the entire back garden terrace for our party of 30 guests. The guest list itself was a political minefield. Sylvia had specific ideas about who should be invited based on their social standing, business connections, and personal history with our family. I spent weeks tracking down contact information for people she hadn't spoken to in years, but suddenly deemed essential for her milestone celebration. "Make sure the Andersons are invited," she instructed one day. "Thomas Anderson just became the head of First National Bank. We need to strengthen that relationship." "But Mom didn't Mrs. Anderson, and you have that huge argument at the charity gala last year," I asked, remembering the very public disagreement that had ended with both women leaving early. "That's precisely why they need to be invited, Bree," she said with a dismissive wave. "This is an opportunity for Patricia to apologize to me publicly by attending my important event." For her gift, I commissioned a custom-designed diamond and sapphire necklace from her favorite jeweler, spending nearly $20,000 of my own savings. I selected sapphires to match her eyes, with the largest stone being precisely 60 points to symbolize her birthday. I even arranged for a professional photographer to capture the evening, knowing how important appearances were to her. The evening of the party arrived with perfect early autumn weather. The terrace at Rossetti's was transformed with elegant floral arrangements of white roses and blue hydrangeas, Sylvia's favorites. Golden candles flickered on every table, and a string quartet played softly in the corner. Everything looked exactly as she had envisioned. My mother arrived fashionably late, making her entrance in a designer gown that probably cost more than what most people spend on a car. She looked stunning, I had to admit. Years of expensive skincare, subtle cosmetic procedures, and rigorous exercise had kept her looking at least 15 years younger than her age. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless, and her smile practiced to perfection as she greeted each guest. "Darling, the flowers are a bit sparse on that table," she whispered sharply as I hugged her hello. "And I specifically requested the 2010 vintage of champagne, not the 2012. "I'll take care of it right away," I assured her, swallowing my frustration. Even on her birthday, nothing could just be enjoyed without criticism. Despite these minor flaws, the evening began pleasantly enough. Dinner was served, the conversation flowed, and my mother appeared to be enjoying the attention and admiration of her guests. I began to relax slightly, thinking we might actually make it through the night without incident. After the main course, waiters circulated with champagne for the toast, as the birthday girl Sylvia would naturally speak first. I expected the usual gracious but slightly self-congratulatory speech about her accomplishments and the wonderful friends surrounding her. I stood to the side, champagne flute in hand, prepared to follow with my own toast, highlighting her achievements and expressing my appreciation as her daughter. My mother rose elegantly from her seat, champagne glass held high. Her sapphire earrings caught the candlelight as she smiled at the assembled guests. She thanked everyone for coming, mentioned a few special friends by name, and spoke briefly about how blessed she felt to have reached this milestone surrounded by such distinguished company. Then her gaze shifted directly to me, and something in her expression changed almost imperceptibly. Later, I would recognize it as the look she always got before delivering a particularly cutting remark, a slight tightening around her eyes that I had learned to fear since childhood. "And of course my daughter Bree is here," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the terrace. "She arranged this lovely evening, though the champagne isn't quite the right vintage." A few guests chuckled uncomfortably. I forced a smile used to these small public humiliations. "You know," she continued, swirling her champagne, "people always ask what gift I want for my birthday. I have everything material I could desire at this point in my life." She paused, taking a sip of her champagne, and I noticed she had already consumed several glasses throughout the evening. Her eyes had that slightly unfocused look that usually preceded her most unfiltered comments. "But if I'm being completely honest about my greatest wish," she said, still looking directly at me, "it would be for Bree to finally leave my life entirely. That would truly be the best birthday gift." The terrace fell completely silent. For a moment, I thought I had misheard her. But the shocked expressions on our guests' faces confirmed that she had indeed just announced to everyone that she wished I would disappear from her life. "Mom," I said weakly, my voice barely audible. She laughed, a brittle sound that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, don't look so shocked, dear. Everyone knows you've never lived up to the Harper name. Your father would be so disappointed in how you've turned out." A few guests looked down at their plates. Others exchanged uncomfortable glances. My mother's oldest friend, Barbara, reached over and touched Sylvia's arm as if to stop her, but she shook it off. "All these years," she continued, her words slightly slurred, "trying to mold you into something worthwhile. And what do I have to show for it? A daughter who can't even order the correct vintage of champagne." I stood, frozen champagne glass trembling in my hand, as 30 pairs of eyes darted between my mother and me. Some people were clearly mortified on my behalf. Others seemed almost voyeuristically fascinated by this public family meltdown. A few even chuckled nervously, as if trying to frame her cruelty as a joke. "I think you've had enough champagne, Mom," I finally managed to say, attempting to salvage some dignity from the situation. "And there she goes, trying to control me," Sylvia laughed, addressing the crowd. "On my own birthday?" I placed my untouched champagne on the nearest table, grabbed my purse, and somehow managed to walk, not run, toward the exit. My legs felt disconnected from my body. My face burned with humiliation. Tears threatened, but I refused to give her the satisfaction of seeing me cry. "Bree, don't be so sensitive," I heard her call after me. "Everyone knows I'm just being honest." I made it to my car before the tears came. Sitting behind the wheel, I couldn't see clearly enough to drive. My hands shook so badly I dropped my keys twice before managing to insert them into the ignition. Mascara streaked down my face as I finally pulled out of the parking lot, nearly sideswiping another vehicle in my emotional state. The 15-minute drive home passed in a blur. I remember flashes of streetlights through tears, the sound of my own ragged breathing, and the crushing weight of 30 years of rejection, culminating in that single horrible moment. My own mother had just publicly declared that her greatest wish was for me to disappear from her life on her birthday, in front of everyone we knew. By some miracle, I made it home without crashing. I stumbled into my apartment, kicked off my heels, and collapsed onto the couch in my expensive dress. The beautiful necklace box sat on my coffee table, the gift I had so carefully selected, now a painful reminder of my desperate, pathetic desire for maternal approval that would never come. I curled into a ball and sobbed until I had no tears left, feeling like that little girl who was never quite good enough, never pretty enough, never perfect enough for Sylvia Harper. The silence of my apartment pressed in around me after my tears finally subsided. It was just after midnight, and I found myself staring blankly at the ceiling, replaying the evening's events on an excruciating loop in my mind. How could she have said those things? How many of our friends and family had secretly pitied me all these years? Had everyone been talking about our dysfunctional relationship behind my back? Every memory of my mother's criticism suddenly took on new meaning. This wasn't just her being strict or having high standards, as I'd always tried to rationalize. The birthday toast had revealed the truth. I'd been denying my mother genuinely resented my very existence. You're being too dramatic. I could almost hear her voice in my head. Always making everything about you. But this time she had literally made it about me, publicly wishing I would disappear from her life. I grabbed my phone and scrolled to Amanda's contact. Amanda had been my best friend since college, the one person who consistently told me my relationship with my mother wasn't normal. It was nearly 1 a.m, but I needed to talk to someone who would understand. She answered on the third ring, her voice groggy with sleep. "Bree, what's wrong?" The moment I heard her voice, I started crying again. Between sobs, I managed to relay what had happened at the birthday dinner. "Oh my God, Bree," she said, fully awake now. "That's beyond cruel. That's emotional abuse." "Maybe she didn't mean it," I said weakly, the lifetime habit of making excuses for my mother still ingrained in me. She had been drinking a lot of champagne. "Stop it," Amanda said firmly. "You know alcohol doesn't make people say things they don't mean. It just lowers their inhibitions about saying what they really think. I've been telling you for years that your relationship with her is toxic. But what am I supposed to do? She controls everything, Amanda. My job, my apartment, most of my bank accounts. I'm nearly 30 years old and I have nothing that's truly mine." "That's not true," Amanda countered. "You have your skills, your intelligence, your work ethic. All of that is yours, not hers. You could walk away, start fresh." "And go where? Do what?" The panic rose in my chest at the thought. I've never worked anywhere but Harper Industries. My resume would have one entry. Who would hire me? Everyone would know I was running away from my family business. "Lots of people would hire you. You're brilliant at marketing and business development. Those quarterly reports she takes credit for. You wrote those. That major account with Johnson Group. You landed that. She needs you way more than you need her." I fell silent, considering this perspective. It was true that I had become increasingly essential to the day-to-day operations of Harper Industries over the past few years. My mother still made the final decisions, but I did much of the actual work that kept the company successful. "I don't know, Amanda. The thought of walking away from everything terrifies me. More terrifying than spending the rest of your life with someone who just publicly announced she wishes you would disappear." She had a point. "Try to get some sleep," Amanda said gently. "Come over for breakfast tomorrow. We'll figure this out together. You don't have to decide anything tonight." After hanging up, I took a long shower, trying to wash away the evening's humiliation. As the hot water ran over me, fragments of memories surfaced, all the times my mother had undermined me, controlled me, belittled me. When I was 8, winning second place in the school science fair, and her first comment was, "Second place is just the first loser." At 16, being told my father's funeral attire made me look boxy and having to change clothes while relatives waited downstairs. At 22, bringing home my first boyfriend who met all her criteria on paper: right family, right school, right career path, only to have her criticize everything from his table manners to his haircut until he never called again. At 25, landing a major client for the company and having her take all the credit at the board meeting, introducing me merely as her assistant when I was actually a vice president. The pattern was clear. This wasn't a relationship that could be fixed with better communication or clearer boundaries. This was a lifetime of systematic emotional abuse that I had normalized and excused. I couldn't sleep. Instead, I found myself at my home office desk at 3 a.m, opening my laptop with newfound purpose. I began looking through my personal files, searching for any important documents related to my financial and legal standing. As I sorted through digital folders, I discovered copies of my father's will that my mother thought I had never seen. I had saved them years ago, sensing I might need them someday. Reading through the legal language now, I realized something critical that I had overlooked before. While my mother was the controlling trustee of my inheritance until I turned 35, my name was already on many of the accounts and properties as co-owner. Further digging revealed that my father had structured things more carefully than I had realized. The downtown office building where Harper Industries was headquartered was actually owned jointly by my mother and me, not by the company itself. The same was true for several other real estate holdings and investment accounts. My phone began buzzing around 7 a.m. Multiple missed calls and texts from my mother lit up the screen. I scrolled through them with a growing sense of detachment. "You embarrassed me by leaving early. Everyone noticed your dramatic exit. So typical of you to make my birthday about yourself. Call me immediately. Not a single apology or acknowledgement of what she had said. Instead, she was trying to flip the narrative, making me the villain for walking out after her cruel words. The final text came in as I was reading the others. I expect you at the office by 9. We have damage control to do after your behavior last night. Damage control. After my behavior. Something inside me hardened. The hurt was still there, but it was now being rapidly replaced by anger. White-hot, clarifying anger that burned through the fog of self-doubt and fear that had controlled me for decades. I texted back a single word, no. Then I blocked her number, got dressed, and left for Amanda's place, taking with me the folder of documents I had compiled overnight. For the first time in my adult life, I was going to make a decision without considering my mother's approval, and it felt both terrifying and exhilarating. As I drove to Amanda's apartment, I realized I was smiling despite everything. The invisible chains that had bound me to my mother's approval were beginning to break. I wasn't just going to walk away as she had wished. I was going to take back what was rightfully mine. Amanda's cozy apartment felt like a sanctuary, compared to my own perfectly decorated but soulless space. She greeted me with a hug and a cup of strong coffee, leading me to her kitchen table where she had prepared a simple breakfast of scrambled eggs and toast. You look like you haven't slept, she observed, pushing a plate toward me. I haven't, I admitted, but I've been productive. I placed my folder of documents on the table. Over breakfast, I explained what I had discovered about my legal and financial entanglements with my mother and Harper Industries. Amanda listened carefully occasionally, asking clarifying questions. She had worked in human resources for a large corporation and had a practical understanding of business matters that I found reassuring. So, technically, you own 49% of the company and are co-owner of multiple properties and accounts, but your mother has been acting as if she owns everything outright, Amanda summarized. Exactly. My father set it up to protect me, but she's manipulated the situation to maintain control. I've been so conditioned to defer to her that I never properly asserted my rights. That ends today, Amanda said firmly. First, you need professional advice. My neighbor is a financial advisor with Merrill Lynch. I can call her right now. Within an hour, I was sitting in Lisa Goldstein's home office, explaining my situation. Lisa was professional but warm, listening carefully without judgment, as I outlined my complicated financial entanglements with my mother. Based on what you're describing, your position is actually much stronger than you realized, Lisa said after reviewing the documents I had brought. Your father created a trust structure that gives your mother administrative control until you're 35, but he built in significant protections for your ownership rights. She can't sell major assets or make fundamental changes to the business structure without your approval. She never told me that part, I said, unsurprised by yet another deception. Most importantly, Lisa continued, your name is on multiple accounts as co-owner, not just as an authorized user. That gives you equal legal right to manage those accounts. What do you recommend I do to protect myself? Lisa thought for a moment. First, you should freeze the joint business accounts to prevent any retaliatory withdrawals once your mother realizes you're asserting independence. Second, you need to establish separate personal accounts immediately if you don't already have them. Third, you need a good business attorney to review all company documents and advise you on next steps. She recommended several attorneys who specialized in business law and family asset disputes. I called the first one on her list from her office and was lucky enough to secure an appointment for that afternoon due to a cancellation. Between appointments, Amanda helped me open new personal bank and credit card accounts at a bank where my mother had no connections. I transferred my personal savings, the money I had managed to set aside in an account my mother didn't know about, into the new account. It wasn't much compared to my theoretical net worth, but it was enough to sustain me for a few months if necessary. My meeting with attorney James Wilson was another revelation. After reviewing my documents, he confirmed Lisa's assessment that my legal position was strong. Your mother has been operating with your passive consent, he explained. Once you actively assert your ownership rights, she'll be legally obligated to include you in all significant business decisions. Furthermore, the properties that you co-own outright, like the main office building, are separate from the business itself. You have every right to access them. She's had the locks changed twice, without giving me the new keys, I admitted. I always had to ask the receptionist to let me in if I arrived before my mother. Attorney Wilson frowned. That's problematic. As co-owner, you have every legal right to access the property. I recommend changing the locks yourself and providing your mother with a set of keys, just as she should have done for you. The plan was taking shape. With Lisa's financial advice and Attorney Wilson's legal guidance, I began to see a path forward that didn't involve simply walking away with nothing. That evening, I returned to my apartment to gather essential documents and belongings. I didn't know how my mother would react once I began asserting my independence, but I suspected she might try to use my apartment as leverage. Although it was in my name, she had paid for it through the family business. I packed several suitcases with clothes, personal mementos, and important papers. Amanda had offered her spare bedroom as a temporary safe haven until the situation stabilized. I felt a twinge of sadness as I looked around the beautiful apartment that had never really felt like home. Like everything else in my life, it had been chosen and controlled by my mother. The next morning, I put my plan into action. My first stop was the bank where Harper Industries held its primary accounts. With my identification and documentation proving my co-ownership, I requested that several key accounts be frozen temporarily, citing potential unauthorized transactions. The bank manager was initially reluctant until I showed him the trust documents, clearly stating my ownership stake. Within an hour, the main operational accounts of Harper Industries were temporarily inaccessible without dual authorization from both my mother and me. Next, I visited the property management company that maintained the office building housing Harper Industries. As the co-owner of record, I requested a change of locks for the executive floor, explaining that there had been security concerns. By early afternoon, the locks had been changed, and I held the only set of keys. I had a duplicate set made for my mother, which I would provide to her through my attorney, along with formal notice of the changes. My final stop was a small storage facility where I had discovered my father kept duplicate copies of all important family and business documents. My mother thought she had collected everything after his death, but he had mentioned this backup location to me during one of our rare private conversations shortly before he died. Just in case, he had said with a meaningful look that I didn't fully understand at the time. The climate-controlled unit contained dozens of labeled boxes. I spent 2 hours carefully going through them, finding original deeds, certificates of ownership, insurance policies, investment records, and detailed accounting ledgers that provided a complete picture of the family's assets. Most importantly, I found handwritten notes from my father outlining his intentions for the business succession and specific instructions that had never been properly implemented after his death. I took everything to Attorney Wilson's office, where his team began making official copies of all documents. By late afternoon, we had assembled a comprehensive case file establishing my legal rights and ownership claims. As I left the attorney's office with a portfolio of certified copies, my phone, which I had temporarily unblocked, exploded with notifications. Dozens of missed calls and texts from my mother, escalating from irritation to rage as the day progressed, and she discovered her access to accounts had been restricted and the office locks changed. The most recent voicemail captured her fury. "How dare you freeze the accounts? Do you have any idea what you've done? The board meeting is tomorrow and we can't access the quarterly reports. This is sabotage. You will regret this. Bree, I made you and I can break you just as easily." I took a deep breath, feeling a strange mix of terror and exhilaration. There would be no turning back now. I had taken the first steps toward freedom from my mother's control, and despite my anxiety about the confrontation to come, I felt more alive than I had in years. That night, staying at Amanda's apartment with my essential belongings secured, I finally slept peacefully for the first time since my mother's birthday dinner. The battle was just beginning, but I was no longer fighting with my hands tied behind my back. I had allies' information, and most importantly, the legal right to stand my ground. Tomorrow would bring the inevitable confrontation, but tonight I allowed myself to feel the quiet strength of having taken control of my own life at last. The confrontation I had been both dreading and anticipating arrived at precisely 8:15 the next morning when my phone rang with a call from the building security desk. "Miss Harper, your mother is here demanding access to the office. She's quite insistent," the security guard said diplomatically, though I could hear my mother's voice raised in the background. Please inform her that her new office keys will be delivered by courier before noon, along with some legal documents she needs to review, I replied calmly. In the meantime, she's welcome to wait in the lobby or return later. I hung up before he could respond, my heart pounding but my resolve firm. Attorney Wilson had advised me to avoid direct confrontation until all legal preparations were complete. The courier would be delivering not just new keys but also formal notice of my assertion of ownership rights and my new role as co-administrator of the family trust. 15 minutes later, my phone exploded with my mother's call. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Have you completely lost your mind?" she hissed without preamble. "I'm standing in the lobby of our building like some common visitor being denied entry by security. Do you have any idea how this looks?" "About as humiliating as being told in front of 30 people that your mother's greatest wish is for you to disappear from her life," I replied, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "Oh, for God's sake, Bree. It was a joke. You've always been so oversensitive. Is this childish tantrum really worth destroying our company's reputation?" "It wasn't a joke, Mom. It was the most honest thing you've ever said to me. You finally revealed what you truly think of me, and you know what? It was clarifying. It helped me see our relationship for what it really is." "And what exactly do you think that is?" Her voice had taken on the dangerously sweet tone she used when she was at her most furious. "A prison. One where you've been both warden and beneficiary of my confinement. But Dad didn't intend for things to be this way, and I have the documents to prove it." There was a moment of silence on the line. When she spoke again, her voice had changed, becoming calculating. "Whatever you think you're doing, it won't work. The board will never support you over me. Our clients won't do business with you independently. You'll be ruined socially and professionally. That's a risk I'm willing to take. The courier will deliver your keys and the legal documents soon. I suggest you review them with your attorney." "My attorney? Don't you mean our family attorney?" "Another example of your naivety, Bree. Jeffrey Barnett has been my personal attorney for 30 years. He represents my interests, not yours." "I'm aware," I said. "That's why I've retained my own counsel. Attorney Wilson will be contacting Mr. Barnett later today to begin discussions about the formal separation of our business interests." "Separation," she laughed, though it sounded forced. "There will be no separation. You signed co-management agreements when you joined the company. Everything you've touched belongs to Harper Industries." "Actually, I've reviewed those agreements with my attorney. They're remarkably one-sided and potentially unenforceable. We'll be challenging them as part of our overall case." Another silence, longer this time. I could almost hear her recalculating her approach. "Bree," she said, her voice suddenly softening into the manipulative tone I knew well, "I think we've both said things we regret. Why don't we meet for lunch and discuss this reasonably? Just mother and daughter, no attorneys." "No," I replied simply. "Any communication between us will need to go through our respective legal representatives from now on. Goodbye, Mother." I hung up my hand, trembling slightly, but my mind clear. I had withstood the first direct confrontation without backing down. It was a small victory, but a significant one for someone who had spent their entire life capitulating to Sylvia Harper's demands. The rest of the morning passed in a flurry of activity. I met with key employees of Harper Industries whom I knew were more loyal to the company itself than to my mother personally. I explained that there were some administrative changes underway, but assured them that their jobs were secure. Most seemed relieved rather than concerned, which told me volumes about how my mother was perceived within the organization. Around noon, my mother attempted a different approach. She arrived at Amanda's apartment building, somehow having discovered where I was staying. The doorman called up to warn us. "Miss Harper's mother is in the lobby insisting on coming up. Should I send her away?" Amanda looked at me questioningly. I shook my head. "Please inform her that I'm not available and that all communication should go through our attorneys," I instructed the doorman. 20 minutes later, my mother was still in the lobby, refusing to leave, and creating a scene that had other residents uncomfortable. Finally, I agreed to speak with her briefly in the lobby, with Amanda accompanying me for support. Sylvia looked immaculate as always in a tailored suit, not a hair out of place despite her evident fury. When she saw me, her expression shifted instantly to one of maternal concern, a performance for the benefit of onlookers. "Darling, I've been so worried," she said, moving to embrace me. I stepped back, maintaining physical distance. What do you want, Mom? I've made it clear that our communication should be through our attorneys. This ridiculous legal posturing is beneath us, she said, lowering her voice. We're family. We can resolve this privately. Like we resolved things at your birthday dinner, when you publicly wished me out of your life. Her eyes darted to Amanda, then to the curious doorman aware of potential witnesses to the conversation. I was upset. I had too much champagne. You know I didn't mean it. Actually, I think it was the most honest you've ever been with me. And it helped me realize I need to be honest too. I don't want to work with you anymore. I don't want to live under your control. I'm taking the steps necessary to establish my independence, as Dad intended before you manipulated the situation after his death. Her facade cracked slightly, her eyes hardening. You ungrateful child, everything I've done has been for your benefit. I've given you a life of privilege, a prestigious career connections most people would kill for. You've given me a life of emotional abuse, Mother. You've used financial control to keep me dependent on you. You've undermined my confidence, isolated me from supportive relationships, and treated me like a possession rather than a daughter. That ends now. If you continue with this, I will make sure everyone in our social circle knows what an unstable, vindictive daughter you really are. She threatened, her voice low but venomous. I'll tell them you're having some kind of breakdown. No one will believe your side over mine. Amanda stepped forward. Actually, Sylvia, I recorded your entire toast at the birthday dinner on my phone. I was planning to make a nice video of all the speeches, but what I captured instead was you publicly wishing your daughter would disappear from your life. I'm sure your social circle would find that recording very illuminating. My mother's face paled. She hadn't realized Amanda was at the dinner, seated at a far table with some of my friends from college whom Sylvia had dismissed as unimportant. You're bluffing, she said, but uncertainty had crept into her voice. Amanda pulled out her phone, tapped the screen a few times, and held it up. My mother's voice came through clearly. But if I'm being completely honest about my greatest wish, it would be for Bree to finally leave my life entirely. That would truly be the best birthday gift. Sylvia's composure finally cracked entirely. You had no right to record me without permission. It was a public event, Amanda replied calmly. And I think everyone should know exactly what kind of mother wishes her child would disappear. My mother turned to me, her expression now openly furious. This isn't over, Bree. Not by a long shot. You think you can stand against me? I built Harper Industries into what it is today. The board will back me. Our clients will back me. You'll be left with nothing. That's where you're wrong, I said quietly. I've already spoken with 3 board members who expressed concern about your recent business decisions. I've also contacted our top 5 clients, all of whom have been working directly with me for the past 2 years, while you've been taking credit for my work. They've all expressed support for my continued involvement with their accounts. This was partially a bluff. I had spoken with only 1 board member and 2 clients so far, but the look of uncertainty that flashed across my mother's face told me I had hit close to the mark. You'll regret this, she said, her voice cold. When this is all over, don't come crawling back expecting forgiveness. I won't, I assured her, because for the first time in my life, I'm not the one who needs forgiveness in this relationship. As Amanda and I turned to leave, my mother called after me. Your father would be ashamed of you. I stopped and looked back at her. No, Mom. Dad would be proud that I'm finally standing up for myself. The documents I found in his storage unit make that very clear. He wanted me to have independence and control. You're the one who betrayed his wishes. We walked away, leaving her standing speechless in the lobby. As we rode the elevator back to Amanda's apartment, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and liberation. The confrontation had been painful but necessary. I had faced my mother's anger and manipulation head-on for the first time in my adult life and had not buckled under the pressure. Later that afternoon, I received a call from Attorney Wilson. My mother's lawyer had reached out demanding an immediate meeting to resolve this misunderstanding. We agreed to a meeting the following day at Wilson's office, with both parties and their legal representation present. That evening, my phone lit up with messages from family, friends, and relatives who had apparently heard Sylvia's version of events, that I was having some kind of breakdown, had locked her out of the business, and was making irrational demands. Some expressed concern for my mental health. Others chided me for being ungrateful to such a devoted mother. Only a few those who had witnessed Sylvia's behavior over the years or had been at the birthday dinner reached out with support. My father's sister, Aunt Catherine, whom my mother had alienated years ago, called to say, "It's about time, Bree. Your father would be so proud of you for standing up to her." Those words of support meant everything as I prepared for the legal battle ahead. For the first time, I wasn't fighting to win my mother's approval. I was fighting for my independence from it. The distinction made all the difference. The week following my confrontation with my mother was one of the most challenging of my life. The meeting between our attorneys quickly revealed that this would not be a simple or amicable separation. My mother refused to acknowledge any wrongdoing or accept that I had legitimate grievances. Instead, she positioned herself as the victim of an ungrateful daughter's betrayal. "My client has devoted her life to preparing Miss Harper for her role in the family business," her attorney stated smoothly. "This sudden hostile action appears to be driven by personal rather than professional concerns and potentially indicates emotional instability." My attorney countered with evidence of my mother's financial control and business contributions I had made that had been systematically credited to her. He also formally presented the documents from my father's storage unit, including handwritten notes that clearly outlined his intention for me to have a greater role in the business than my mother had allowed. The meeting ended in a stalemate, with both sides agreeing only to maintain the status quo temporarily while negotiations continued. This meant the company accounts remained frozen, requiring dual authorization for any significant transactions, and I retained control of access to the office building as co-owner. Outside the legal arena, my mother launched a campaign to undermine my credibility within our social and business circles. I began hearing from mutual acquaintances that she was telling people I was suffering from mental health issues, possibly a nervous breakdown triggered by work pressure. "She's always been fragile," one family friend reported my mother saying. "Richard protected her too much, and now she can't handle the responsibilities of the business." Other rumors suggested I was abusing prescription medication or alcohol, which explained my irrational behavior and paranoid accusations against my devoted mother. These character assassinations hurt deeply, not just because they were false, but because some people I had known my entire life actually believed them. Several longtime family friends stopped returning my calls. I was quietly uninvited from a charity committee I had served on for years. The country club where our family had been members for generations suddenly had issues with my membership account. "They're scared of your mother," Amanda pointed out when I expressed hurt over these rejections. "They've seen how she operates and don't want to be her next target. It's not personal, it's self-preservation." She was right, but the social isolation was still painful. I had always been somewhat lonely due to my mother's control over my relationships, but now I felt truly ostracized in the community where I had grown up. The business side presented its own challenges. While the executive office remained accessible only to me unless I provided my mother with the new keys which my attorney advised against until formal agreements were reached, Sylvia still had relationships with many of our clients and vendors. Several clients called me directly confused about the situation after receiving calls from my mother warning them against working with me independently. Most were diplomatic, expressing hope that the family disagreement would be resolved quickly, but a few immediately transferred their accounts to other firms rather than get caught in our conflict. I spent hours on the phone reassuring nervous clients and vendors, carefully explaining that Harper Industries was undergoing administrative restructuring but remained fully operational. Some were convinced, particularly those who had worked directly with me in recent years. Others with longer relationships with my mother were more skeptical. 2 weeks after the initial confrontation, I arranged a private meeting with our company's chief financial officer, Martin Reynolds. Martin had been with Harper Industries since my father's time and had always treated me with respect, though he typically deferred to my mother in all decisions. "I need to understand exactly how the company has been operating financially," I told him in my temporary office, which I had set up in a previously unused conference room to avoid the executive suite drama. Martin looked uncomfortable. "Your mother usually handles these discussions." "I'm aware, but as co-owner of the company, I have a right to complete financial transparency. My attorney has confirmed this." After some hesitation, Martin began walking me through the company's financial structure. What emerged was deeply concerning. While Harper Industries was profitable on paper, my mother had been using company funds for numerous personal expenses. Her luxury car, extensive travel home, renovations, even her personal shopping was being classified as business development or client entertainment. More troublingly, Martin revealed that the company had taken on significant debt in recent years, debt I had been completely unaware of despite my executive position. My mother had leveraged several properties, including the building that housed our offices, to secure loans for expansions and acquisitions that had not yet yielded returns. Why wasn't any of this brought to my attention? I asked, struggling to maintain my composure as I looked at the alarming figures. Martin shifted uncomfortably. Your mother indicated that you were aware of the general strategy but preferred not to be burdened with financial details. Another lie. I had repeatedly asked for greater involvement in the company's financial planning, only to be told by my mother that everything was well in hand and I should focus on marketing and client relations. Armed with this new information, I requested an emergency meeting with the board of directors, a meeting my mother tried and failed to prevent, given my legal standing as a major shareholder. The meeting was tense, with board members clearly uncomfortable being caught between mother and daughter. I presented Martin's financial reports without accusation or emotion, simply stating that as co-owner, I was concerned about the company's financial direction and debt load. My goal is not to disparage my mother's leadership, I concluded, but to ensure transparency and sound fiscal management going forward. I believe we need more robust oversight and reporting procedures. The board, composed primarily of my father's old colleagues and business associates, responded better than I expected. While they had respected Sylvia's leadership, several expressed concern about the debt levels and personal expenditures revealed in Martin's reports. They voted to establish a financial oversight committee that would include 2 board members, the CFO, my mother, and me. It was a small victory, but an important one. For the first time, my mother would not have unilateral control over the company's finances. Throughout this period, I relied heavily on Amanda's emotional support and my growing relationship with my father's sister, Catherine, who had reconnected with me after years of limited contact due to my mother's interference. Catherine shared stories about my father that I had never heard, painting a picture of a man who had genuinely wanted me to eventually lead the company, but had been outmaneuvered by my mother after his death. Richard adored you, Bree, she told me during a long lunch at her home outside the city. He was so proud of your intelligence and kind heart. He always said you had his business sense, but none of his cutthroat tendencies, which he considered a strength, not a weakness. These conversations were healing, giving me a connection to my father I had thought lost forever. They also strengthened my resolve to reclaim my rightful place in the company he had built. Despite these small victories and newfound support, the constant stress and conflict took their toll. I began having trouble sleeping, and my anxiety levels peaked whenever I had to engage directly with issues related to my mother. After a particularly difficult week of legal meetings and client damage control, Amanda suggested I consider therapy. You're dealing with 30 years of emotional abuse and manipulation, she pointed out. That's not something you just shake off, because you've decided to stand up for yourself. A professional could help you process everything that's happening. She recommended Dr. Jennifer Ramos, a psychologist specializing in family trauma and narcissistic abuse recovery. My first session was emotional and exhausting, but also illuminating. Dr. Ramos helped me understand that my feelings of guilt, despite being the wronged party, were common among children of narcissistic parents. You've been conditioned your entire life to prioritize your mother's needs and feelings above your own, she explained. Breaking that pattern isn't just about legal and financial independence, it's about psychological liberation as well. Through weekly sessions, I began to recognize and challenge the deeply ingrained patterns of thought that kept me tied to my mother's approval. I started to understand that my worth wasn't determined by her validation or by the opinion of the social circle she had cultivated around us. Most importantly, I began to envision a future where I could be successful and happy on my own terms, not just in reaction or opposition to Sylvia Harper. 4 weeks into the separation process, I made my first major independent business decision. One of our smaller clients, a boutique skincare brand, was struggling with marketing direction. Without consulting my mother, I developed and presented a comprehensive rebranding strategy that included digital marketing elements Sylvia had always dismissed as trendy and unproven. The client was thrilled with the proposal, doubling their contract value and potentially opening doors to other brands in their market segment. The success gave me confidence that I could indeed thrive professionally without my mother's oversight or approval. When news of the expanded contract reached my mother, she predictably attempted to take control, contacting the client directly to discuss implementation details. To my surprise and relief, the client politely informed her that they would be working exclusively with me on the project as specified in the new contract. It was a small but significant shift in the power dynamic, the first client to explicitly choose to work with me rather than my mother. The pride I felt was untainted by any need for Sylvia's approval, and that realization was perhaps the most meaningful victory of all. 6 months after my mother's birthday dinner, the event that had catalyzed the transformation of my life, I sat across from her in a conference room for the signing of our formal settlement agreement. The months of legal negotiations, emotional turbulence, and business uncertainty had finally culminated in a document that would officially separate our professional and financial lives. My mother looked older than she had at her birthday. The stress of the past months had left visible marks on her carefully maintained appearance. Fine lines that no amount of expensive skincare could conceal framed her eyes and mouth. Still, she maintained her perfect posture and impassive expression, determined not to show weakness. Our respective attorneys walked us through the key points of the agreement. Harper Industries would be restructured with the company formally divided. I would retain control of the marketing, digital media, and new product development divisions, which would operate as an independent entity under a new name, Harper Creative. My mother would maintain control of the traditional business lines and real estate holdings under the original Harper Industries banner. The physical assets, client relationships, and staff had been carefully allocated according to expertise and working relationships. Financial accounts had been separated with equitable distribution of funds based on ownership percentages established in my father's will. Most importantly, each of us would now operate with complete autonomy from the other. As I signed my name to page after page of legal documents, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. There was sadness for the mother-daughter relationship we never truly had relief, that the conflict was ending anxiety about my future independence, and underneath it all, a quiet but growing sense of pride in having stood my ground. When the final signature was complete, my mother gathered her belongings without meeting my eyes. As she stood to leave, I found myself speaking. "Mom," I said quietly, "it didn't have to be this way." She paused, her back still turned to me. "You made your choice, Bree." "No, you made the choice at your birthday dinner when you publicly wished me out of your life. I just finally took you at your word." She turned slightly, her profile visible but her expression unreadable. "I have always done what I thought was best for you and for this family's legacy." "I know you believe that," I replied. "But controlling someone isn't the same as loving them. Dad understood the difference. I hope someday you will too." For a moment, I thought I saw something flicker in her expression, regret perhaps, or at least recognition. But it vanished quickly, replaced by the cool mask I knew so well. "Goodbye, Bree," she said, and walked out of the room and effectively out of my daily life. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into establishing Harper Creative as a viable, independent business. I leased office space in a modern building across town, deliberately choosing a location and aesthetic that contrasted sharply with the traditional conservative environment my mother preferred. The space featured open-concept workstations, collaborative areas with comfortable seating, and walls painted in bright, energizing colors. It physically represented the break from my mother's controlling influence and my emerging personal style. Most of the younger, more digitally focused staff chose to join my new venture rather than stay with the traditional Harper Industries. Their enthusiasm and loyalty touched me deeply and reinforced my confidence in my leadership abilities. "We're excited to work for you directly," my creative director, Jason, told me during our first team meeting in the new space. "You've always had amazing ideas that got watered down or rejected. Now we get to see your full vision implemented." The transition wasn't without challenges. Several long-standing clients opted to remain with my mother, unsure about the stability of my new enterprise. A few vendors with decades-long relationships with Harper Industries were hesitant to extend the same credit terms to my startup operation. Cash flow was tight those first few months as we established ourselves independently. But for every challenge, there seemed to be an unexpected opportunity. Without my mother's conservative approach limiting our client base, I was free to pursue younger, more innovative brands that appreciated our fresh perspective. Digital native companies that Sylvia had dismissed as not substantial enough became enthusiastic clients attracted by our contemporary approach and understanding of online marketing dynamics. 3 months after the launch of Harper Creative, we landed our first major account, a sustainable fashion brand looking to expand nationally. The contract value exceeded any single client I had worked with under my mother's supervision, and it came entirely through my own networking and reputation. On a personal level, the changes were equally significant. I moved out of the apartment my mother had selected and found a charming townhouse in an artistic neighborhood I had always admired, but that Sylvia had considered bohemian and unsuitable. I decorated it according to my own tastes, discovering preferences I hadn't even known I had after years of conforming to my mother's aesthetic. My social circle transformed as well. While many former friends from my mother's circle had drifted away during the conflict, I found myself building genuine relationships based on mutual interests rather than social obligation. Amanda remained my closest friend, but I also connected with neighbors, fellow business owners, and even a community volunteer group that helped young women develop professional skills. My relationship with my Aunt Catherine deepened, filling some of the void left by the loss of maternal connection. Through her, I reconnected with cousins and family members my mother had gradually isolated us from over the years. At our first extended family gathering, a casual barbecue at Catherine's home, I was overwhelmed by the warmth and acceptance I experienced, so different from the formal, performance-like family events my mother had orchestrated. "You seem happier than I've ever seen you," my cousin Michael observed as we sat watching the sunset from Catherine's patio. "More like yourself." "That's just it," I replied, realizing the truth as I spoke. "I'm finally discovering who myself actually is, without my mother defining it for me." Therapy continued to be an essential part of my healing journey. Dr. Ramos helped me work through the complex grief of losing a parent who was still alive but had never provided the unconditional love children naturally seek. We addressed the habits of people-pleasing perfectionism and self-doubt that had been instilled in me through years of criticism and conditional approval. "The goal isn't to eliminate your mother from your emotional life," Dr. Ramos explained during one particularly insightful session. "It's to integrate the reality of who she is and your experiences with her into your life story, without letting it control your future." Occasionally, my mother and I still encountered each other at industry events or through mutual business contacts. These interactions were civil but distant. She never acknowledged the harm she had caused or expressed regret for her behavior at the birthday dinner or throughout my childhood. I came to accept that such recognition might never come, and more importantly, that my healing couldn't depend on receiving it. About 6 months after our legal separation, my mother attempted a form of reconciliation, inviting me to lunch through a formal email. The message was characteristically devoid of any admission of wrongdoing, instead framing our conflict as a misunderstanding that had gotten out of hand. After careful consideration and discussion with Dr. Ramos, I responded with boundaries that were firm but not vindictive. I would consider rebuilding some form of relationship, I wrote, but only with mutual respect and acknowledgement of past patterns. I would not return to our previous dynamic of control and submission. My mother never replied to that email, apparently unwilling or unable to accept a relationship where she couldn't dictate the terms. While this brought its own sadness, it also confirmed that my decision to establish independence had been necessary and right. 1 year after the birthday dinner that changed everything, Harper Creative was thriving beyond my most optimistic projections. We had outgrown our original office space and expanded to a full floor in the same building. Our client roster had tripled, and we were becoming known in the industry for innovative marketing strategies that delivered measurable results. More meaningful than the professional success, however, was my internal transformation. The frightened, approval-seeking daughter who had tolerated decades of emotional abuse had been replaced by a woman who understood her own worth, set healthy boundaries, and built a life aligned with her authentic values and desires. My journey hadn't been about revenge, as my mother probably believed. It had been about reclaiming my life and my identity. In a strange way, her cruel birthday wish had been the catalyst for the greatest gift I could have received: the courage to break free and discover who I really was, when not defined by her expectations and control. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give ourselves is the courage to walk away from those who cannot love us as we deserve. I finally understood that my worth wasn't determined by my mother's approval, it was within me all along. What about you? Have you ever had to make the difficult choice to leave a toxic relationship behind? Remember that your story doesn't end with their cruelty, it begins with your courage. If my story resonated with you today, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your own journey in the comments below. Your experiences might be exactly what someone else needs to hear to find their own strength. Thank you for listening, and remember, the family we choose can be more healing than the family we're born into.